The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke as Eleanor Wilson stepped off the train at Cascade Falls Station. She clutched her worn carpet bag in one hand and a bundle of letters in the other, her heart fluttering with equal parts excitement and trepidation. The 6-day journey from Philadelphia had left her exhausted, her navy blue traveling dress wrinkled and her chestnut hair escaping its once neat bun. None of that mattered now. After months of correspondence, she was finally about to meet Samuel Hayes face to face. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor scanned the platform, searching for the tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes she'd seen in the daguerreotype Samuel had sent. The timber mill owner had described himself as easy to spot in a crowd, with his height and the small scar above his right eyebrow. But as passengers dispersed and the platform emptied, there was no sign of her intended. Miss Wilson? A portly man with greying mutton chops approached, hat in hand. Miss Eleanor Wilson. Yes, that's me, Eleanor confirmed, her stomach tightening at the solemn expression on the man's face. I'm Albert Simmons, the station master. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. He twisted his hat nervously in his hands. There's been an accident. Mr. Hayes, Samuel Hayes. He was on his way to meet your train when it happened. Eleanor's world seemed to narrow, the station platform falling away as she processed his words. An accident? Is he badly hurt? Simmons's eyes filled with sympathy. I'm sorry, miss. Mr. Hayes didn't survive. A logging accident 3 days ago. The whole town's still in shock. Eleanor swayed on her feet, and the station master quickly guided her to a nearby bench. The bundle of letters slipped from her fingers, scattering across the wooden platform like fallen leaves. I know this is a terrible shock, Simmons continued gently. Mrs. Holloway from the boarding house is expecting you. She'll help you get settled while you decide what to do next. What to do next? The words echoed in Eleanor's mind as she mechanically gathered her fallen letters. She had given up everything, sold her meager possessions, left her position at Henderson's dress shop, said goodbye to the only home she'd ever known, all to marry a man she'd never met but had grown to care for. Through his thoughtful, intelligent letters, a man who now lay in a freshly dug grave halfway across the continent from where she'd first read his advertisement seeking a bride. As Simmons led her to a waiting wagon, Eleanor barely registered the town around her, the muddy main street, lined with wooden buildings, the bustle of a growing settlement built on the timber trade. Her careful plans, her hopes for a new beginning, had been felled as surely as one of the mighty trees that had built Samuel Hayes's fortune. Here we are, Miss Wilson. The station master helped her down at a tidy 2-story house with a sign reading, Holloway Boarding House. On the porch stood a plump, grey-haired woman with a kind face creased with sympathy. You poor dear, the woman said, hurrying forward. I'm Martha Holloway. Come inside and rest. You've had a terrible shock. Eleanor allowed herself to be led into the boarding house, her mind still struggling to comprehend that her journey, one that had begun with such hope, had ended in tragedy before it could truly begin. What she didn't notice was the tall figure watching from across the street, his face an exact mirror of the one in the daguerreotype she carried, identical in every way, save for the hardness in his eyes and the absence of a scar. This is the story of a woman who crossed a continent to marry a man she knew only through his letters, only to discover that fate had other plans, and that sometimes the greatest dangers and deepest loves can be found in the most unexpected places. Eleanor sat at the small writing desk in her boarding house room, a blank sheet of paper before her. The oil lamp cast a warm glow that failed to reach the hollowness inside her. She'd been in Cascade Falls for 3 days now, and still couldn't bring herself to write to her cousin Mary back in Philadelphia, the only family she had left. How could she explain that she had traveled thousands of miles to marry a ghost? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Wilson, there's someone here to see you." Martha Holloway's voice was tentative. Eleanor sighed, setting down her pen. It was probably Reverend Parker again, with his offers of charity and not-so-subtle suggestions that she should return east. "Please tell them I'm indisposed, Mrs. Holloway. It's Mr. Hayes, miss. Benjamin Hayes." Eleanor froze. Samuel's brother? In his letters, Samuel had mentioned a brother who worked as a forest ranger, but little more. His twin, actually. Mrs. Holloway replied, her voice lowering. "Identical, except for, well, you'll see. He's insisting on speaking with you." Curiosity overcame Eleanor's reluctance. "Please, show him in." A moment later, Eleanor found herself staring at what could only be described as an apparition. The man who entered the room wore Samuel's face. The same strong jaw, the same golden brown hair, the same tall, powerful build she had seen in the daguerreotype. But the resemblance ended at the physical. Where Samuel's photograph had shown laughing eyes and an easy smile, this man's expression was guarded, his posture tense like a coiled spring. "Miss Wilson." His voice was deeper than she had imagined Samuel's, rougher somehow. "I'm Benjamin Hayes." Eleanor stood on unsteady legs, unable to look away from this living ghost. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't expect to see your dead fiancé walking." A muscle twitched in his jaw. Samuel and I hadn't seen each other in nearly 2 years, but people say we remained identical, except for this. He gestured to his unblemished forehead, where Samuel would have had his scar. "I'm sorry for your loss," Eleanor managed, finding her voice. "Your brother seemed like a good man." Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. "You never met him?" "No, but we corresponded for 8 months. I feel as though I knew him." She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite the implied accusation. In his tone, Benjamin studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Instead, she met his gaze steadily. "Did you know he was one of the wealthiest men in Cascade Falls?" he asked bluntly. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. "I knew he owned a timber mill. He never discussed his finances in detail. But you knew he had property, assets. Mr. Hayes, if you've come here to accuse me of some fortune-hunting scheme, you can leave immediately." Eleanor's voice shook, with barely contained anger. "I came here to marry a man whose mind and heart I had come to know through his letters, a man who wanted a partner, not just a wife. If you think I traveled thousands of miles for money, then you understand neither me nor your brother." For a moment, Benjamin looked startled by her outburst. Then, unexpectedly, something in his expression softened. "Samuel always did have good judgment about people," he said quietly. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "I came because of this. Samuel wrote to me the week before he died, the first communication I'd had from him in nearly 2 years." He handed her the letter. The handwriting on the envelope matched the script Eleanor had come to know so well. "He asked me to look after you if anything happened to him," Benjamin continued. "Said he had enemies in Cascade Falls, people who might try to take advantage of you." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Enemies? Samuel never mentioned enemies in his letters." "My brother always did try to see the best in people," Benjamin replied, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "Even when they didn't deserve it." "What kind of enemies?" Eleanor pressed. Benjamin moved to the window, glancing out at the darkening street before answering. The kind that might arrange a logging accident for a man who stood in their way. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting Samuel was murdered?" "I'm suggesting you might be in danger yourself, Miss Wilson." He turned back to face her. "The official story is that a support rope snapped while Samuel was inspecting a logging site. Very convenient timing, considering he was on his way to meet your train. But why would anyone want to harm Samuel, or me for that matter? Benjamin's expression darkened, because Samuel discovered something that certain powerful people in this town would kill to keep hidden. And they don't know how much he might have told you. Eleanor shook her head. He told me nothing about any danger or secrets. His letters were about his life here, the beauty of the forests, his hopes for our future together. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then why did he write to me after 2 years of silence, warning me that his life might be in danger? Benjamin challenged. And why, the day after his death, was his office at the mill broken into and ransacked? The implication struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She sank back into her chair, trying to reconcile the peaceful life Samuel had described with this tale of danger and intrigue. What would you have me do, Mr. Hayes? Return to Philadelphia? No. Benjamin's answer was immediate. If Samuel was murdered, whoever did it might worry you know something, whether you do or not. You might be followed, and if you suddenly left town, they might decide it's safer to eliminate you before you can reach authorities elsewhere. So I'm trapped here? Eleanor asked incredulously. Not trapped. Protected. Benjamin stepped closer, his expression intense. Come stay at my cabin. It's remote, defensible. I can keep you safe while I investigate what really happened to my brother. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. You can't seriously expect me to go live alone with a man I just met, in a remote cabin in the wilderness. Mrs. Holloway could accompany you as chaperone, Benjamin suggested, clearly having anticipated this objection. She was Samuel's housekeeper for years. I trust her completely. And if I refuse? Benjamin's expression hardened again. Then, I failed in the last promise I made to my brother, but I won't force you, Miss Wilson. The choice is yours. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, trying to think. 3 days ago, she had been ready to marry a man she knew only through letters, to build a life in this strange, wild place. Now that man was dead, possibly murdered, and his identical twin was offering protection from nameless enemies. It was madness, and yet something in Benjamin's eyes, a glimpse of the same steadiness she had sensed in Samuel's letters, gave her pause. I need time to consider, she finally said. Benjamin nodded once. You have until morning. After that, it may be too late. He moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing, Miss Wilson. Did Samuel send you anything? Documents, maps, anything unusual? Eleanor shook her head. Just letters. And a photograph. Something like disappointment flashed across Benjamin's face. If you decide to accept my help, be ready at first light, pack only what you can carry, and tell no one where you're going. With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor with far more questions than answers. She sat motionless for several minutes, her mind racing. Then, with sudden decision, she pulled out Samuel's letters and began reading them again, searching for any hint of the danger Benjamin had described. The familiar handwriting brought a fresh wave of grief, but Eleanor pushed through it, focusing instead on finding anything she might have missed. Hours later, as the town quieted and the oil in her lamp burned low, Eleanor found it, a passage in Samuel's last letter that had seemed romantic at the time, but now took on a different meaning. I've marked the most beautiful places in the forest for us to visit together, secret groves where the trees have stood for centuries, untouched by man. I've made maps of these special places, my own private atlas of wonders to share with you. When you arrive, I'll show you the true treasures of this wild land, riches more valuable than gold. Eleanor stared at the words, a chill running down her spine. Samuel hadn't been speaking romantically about scenic views. He'd been telling her about something specific, something valuable enough to kill for. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Outside her room, Eleanor froze, listening intently. Another creak, closer this time. Someone was approaching her door with slow, careful steps. Heart pounding, Eleanor quietly moved to the bed, slipping Samuel's letters under the mattress. She had just straightened when the doorknob began to turn slowly. She hadn't locked it after Benjamin left. Thinking quickly, Eleanor grabbed the oil lamp from her desk and positioned herself beside the door, holding her breath as it began to open. A tall figure slipped into the room. In the dim light, Eleanor could make out not Benjamin's form, but the bulkier shape of a stranger. As he turned toward her bed, Eleanor swung the lamp with all her strength. The lamp connected with the intruder's head with a sickening crack. The man cried out, stumbling forward as oil splashed across his back. Instantly, his coat caught fire, orange flames leaping up in the darkness. The man's screams filled the room as he thrashed wildly, trying to extinguish the flames. Eleanor darted past him through the open door, nearly colliding with Mrs. Holloway in the hallway. "Fire!" Eleanor shouted. "There's an intruder." The boarding house erupted into chaos. Doors flew open as other boarders emerged in their nightclothes. The burning man staggered into the hallway, still screaming, his face now visible in the firelight. A bearded stranger, with hatred in his eyes. Two male boarders tackled him, smothering the flames with a rug. Mrs. Holloway rushed to fetch water, while others helped subdue the intruder. "Someone fetch the sheriff," a voice called. Within minutes, the narrow hallway was crowded with people. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, trembling with delayed shock. The intruder, his burns painful but not life-threatening, glared at her with undisguised malice. "Who sent you?" Eleanor demanded, finding courage in her anger. "What were you looking for?" The man spat at her feet but remained silent. Sheriff Clayton Miller arrived shortly after, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and skeptical eyes. He took in the scene, questioning witnesses and examining Eleanor's disturbed room before turning his attention to the captured intruder. Well, Jim Weber." The sheriff's tone was unsurprised. "Do for Montgomery what you did for him at the Carson place?" The man called Weber maintained his sullen silence. Sheriff Miller turned to Eleanor. "You're Samuel Hayes's mail-order bride? The one who arrived after he died?" Eleanor nodded, bristling slightly at his choice of words, but too shaken to correct him. "And you think this man was trying to rob you?" "No," Eleanor replied firmly. "I think he was searching for something specific, something Samuel might have given me." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "And did Samuel give you anything valuable?" "No," Eleanor answered truthfully. "But someone seems to think he did." Sheriff Miller studied her face. "Victor Montgomery employs this man as a negotiator when he wants to acquire property. Interesting that he'd send him after a seamstress from Philadelphia." "I don't know any Victor Montgomery," Eleanor said. "He knows you, apparently." The sheriff nodded to his deputy to take Weber away. "Miss Wilson, I'd advise you to be careful. Montgomery isn't a man who gives up easily." "I don't understand what he wants from me." Sheriff Miller shrugged. "Samuel, Hayes and Montgomery were rivals. Hayes owned the smaller mill, but controlled some of the best timber stands in the territory. Montgomery's been trying to buy him out for years." Martha Holloway stepped forward, her face pale. "Sheriff, Miss Wilson can't stay here now. It's not safe." "I have somewhere to go," Eleanor said quietly, making her decision. "Samuel's brother has offered me protection until this matter is resolved." The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. "Benjamin Hayes? I wasn't aware he and Samuel were on speaking terms." "They reconciled recently," Eleanor improvised, unwilling to reveal everything Benjamin had told her. "Given tonight's events, I think accepting his offer would be wise." Sheriff Miller stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Benjamin Hayes is more at home in the wilderness than among people. Been a forest ranger for years, lives up in the mountains, keeps to himself." His tone wasn't exactly disapproving, but it held a note of caution. But he knows the territory better than anyone, and he can handle himself in a fight. Then it's settled, Eleanor said, with more confidence than she felt. I'll leave with him in the morning. As the excitement died down, and the boarders returned to their rooms, Martha Holloway pulled Eleanor aside. I know Benjamin asked me to accompany you as chaperone, she whispered, but I can't leave the boarding house unattended for long. I can come with you initially, help you get settled, but then I'll need to return. Eleanor felt a flicker of anxiety at the thought of being alone with the enigmatic Benjamin Hayes, but after tonight's attack, her choices were limited. I understand, Mrs. Holloway. Thank you for being willing to come at all. Samuel spoke of you so often, Martha said, patting Eleanor's hand. He was so looking forward to your arrival. He would want you to be safe. Later, alone in her room, now with the door firmly locked, Eleanor carefully packed her belongings. The floorboards outside her window still smelled of spilled oil and charred wood, a reminder of how narrowly she had escaped whatever fate her attacker had planned. She pulled Samuel's letters from beneath the mattress, reading again his cryptic reference to maps and true treasures in the forest. What had he discovered that was worth killing for? And had he truly shared that secret with his estranged twin brother? As dawn approached, Eleanor found herself standing at the window, watching the street below for any sign of movement. She was exhausted, but too anxious to sleep. A shadow detached itself from the alley across the street, a tall figure, moving with quiet purpose. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized Benjamin's distinctive gait. He paused, looking up directly at her window, as if sensing her watching. Then he melted back into the shadows to wait. Eleanor touched the daguerreotype of Samuel one last time before tucking it into her pocket. She had come to Cascade Falls to marry a man and start a new life. Instead, she found herself fleeing into the wilderness with his identical twin, pursued by enemies she didn't understand. Yet despite the danger and uncertainty, Eleanor felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring beneath her fear. A sense of purpose, of determination. Samuel had died protecting some secret. The least she could do was discover what it was, and ensure his death was not in vain. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor gathered her bags and went to wake Mrs. Holloway. It was time to leave Cascade Falls behind and step into the unknown forest beyond, where danger and secrets awaited. And perhaps, though she dared not admit it even, to herself, a chance to know the man who wore her dead fiancé's face but possessed a spirit entirely his own. The wagon jostled violently as it hit another rut in the rough forest trail. Eleanor gripped the wooden seat, her knuckles white, as Benjamin guided the team of horses deeper into the wilderness. They had left Cascade Falls before sunrise, slipping out through the rear entrance of the boarding house, while Martha Holloway created a diversion at the front. We're being followed, Benjamin said quietly, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Have been since we crossed Miller's Creek. Eleanor resisted the urge to look back. How can you tell? Broken branches that weren't broken when I came this way yesterday. Hoof prints, too fresh to be from earlier travelers. His voice was matter-of-fact. 2 riders, keeping their distance. Martha Holloway, seated on Eleanor's other side, clutched, her worn carpetbag tighter. Montgomery's men? Most likely. Benjamin guided the horses around a sharp bend, the wagon wheels coming dangerously close to the edge of a steep ravine. We need to lose them before we reach the cabin. How do you propose to do that? Eleanor asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. A ghost of a smile touched Benjamin's lips. The same way I've evaded timber poachers and claimed jumpers for years. He pointed ahead to where the trail forked. There's a ranger station 3 miles down the left fork. We'll head that way, make them think that's our destination. Without warning, Benjamin snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward into a gallop. Eleanor and Martha clung to the seat as the wagon bounced violently over the uneven ground. They thundered down the left fork, dust billowing behind them. After a mile of breakneck speed, Benjamin suddenly pulled the horses to a halt beside a shallow stream. "Quickly," he ordered, jumping down. "We need to make it look like we continued on." Understanding dawned on Eleanor. "You're creating a false trail." Benjamin nodded approvingly. "My brother chose an intelligent woman." The unexpected compliment caught Eleanor off guard, but there was no time to dwell on it. Benjamin unhitched the horses and led them into the stream. "The water will hide their tracks. We'll double back on foot through the woods to the right fork. I have another wagon hidden near there." "On foot?" Martha looked dismayed, eyeing her sturdy but city-appropriate boots. Benjamin's expression softened slightly. "It's just over a mile, Mrs. Holloway. I can carry your bag." They worked quickly to gather their essentials. Benjamin concealed the wagon with branches and underbrush, making it appear abandoned. Eleanor struggled to carry her carpetbag through the dense underbrush, her skirts catching on thorny bushes. After the third time she stumbled, Benjamin wordlessly took her bag too, carrying both women's luggage along with his own pack. The forest was unlike anything Eleanor had ever experienced. Ancient trees towering overhead, their massive trunks wider than 3 men standing with arms outstretched. Shafts of morning sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating a forest floor, carpeted with ferns and moss. Despite their precarious situation, Eleanor couldn't help but marvel at the primeval beauty surrounding them. "These old-growth forests are what Samuel was trying to protect," Benjamin said quietly, noticing her. "Wonder, trees that have stood for 1,000 years or more. They're magnificent," Eleanor breathed. "And valuable." Benjamin's tone hardened. "Worth a fortune to men like Montgomery who see only board feet of lumber, not living monuments." They walked in silence after that, Benjamin setting a pace that was challenging but not impossible for the women to maintain. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to Samuel's letters, his passionate descriptions of the forests now making more sense. What had he discovered that made these particular trees worth killing for? After what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, they reached a small clearing where a second wagon waited, cleverly concealed beneath a canopy of cut branches. "How did you know we'd need this?" Eleanor asked, as Benjamin removed the camouflage. "I didn't," he admitted. "I've maintained escape routes throughout these mountains for years. Habit from my time scouting during the war." This revelation, one of the few personal details he'd shared, intrigued Eleanor, but before she could ask more, Benjamin stiffened, his head turning sharply. "Get down!" he hissed, drawing his rifle in one fluid motion. Eleanor and Martha crouched behind the wagon as Benjamin melted into the underbrush with astonishing speed. For several tense minutes, there was nothing but the natural sounds of the forest. Birds calling, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Then came the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by another. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. Had their pursuers found them? Was Benjamin? "Let's move!" Benjamin's voice came from directly behind them, causing both women to start. "I fired at some deadwood to draw them farther down the false trail. They'll figure out the deception eventually, but it buys us time." As they continued their journey in the second wagon, Eleanor studied Benjamin's profile. The physical resemblance to Samuel was uncanny, yet the differences in demeanor were stark. Where Samuel's letters had revealed a man of optimism and openness, Benjamin radiated vigilance and restraint. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, missing nothing, and the set of his jaw spoke of a man who had learned hard lessons. About trust. "You mentioned you and Samuel were estranged," Eleanor said carefully. "May I ask why?" Benjamin's hands tightened on the reins. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "We disagreed about Montgomery," he finally said. Samuel believed the man could be reasoned with, persuaded to adopt more sustainable logging practices. I knew better. You have history with Montgomery? Benjamin's laugh was devoid of humor. You could say that. Montgomery's logging operation burned 2,000 acres of forest 3 years ago. A controlled burn that went out of control because his men were careless. 5 people died, including a family that had a small homestead in the area. How terrible, Martha murmured. I was the ranger who investigated, found evidence it wasn't just negligence. They deliberately set the fire to clear land Montgomery wanted. Never mind that people lived there. His voice had gone flat. I brought my findings to the territorial authorities, but Montgomery has friends in high places. The case disappeared. And Samuel didn't believe you? Eleanor asked, trying to reconcile this with the man she'd come to know through his letters. Samuel believed in the law in proper channels? Benjamin's expression softened slightly. He wasn't wrong to think that way, just naive. When I decided to pursue my own investigation, gather more evidence, he thought I was becoming obsessed, risking my career over a personal vendetta. That's why you stopped speaking? Benjamin nodded. Until his letter last month, he wrote that he'd discovered something that proved I was right all along. Something about the true value of the old-growth forests on his land. Eleanor's mind flashed to the passage in Samuel's last letter to her. He mentioned maps, she said softly. Special places in the forest more valuable than gold. Benjamin's head whipped around, his eyes intense. Maps? You're certain? He wrote that he'd created maps of special places in the forest, places untouched by man. He called them true treasures, more valuable than gold. Did he send you these maps? No, he said he would show me when I arrived. Benjamin's expression grew thoughtful. Then they must still be at his house or office. Unless Montgomery's men already found them, Eleanor finished. That would explain why his office was ransacked. And why they came after you, Benjamin agreed. They think Samuel sent the maps to you for safekeeping. The wagon climbed steadily higher into the mountains. The forest changed subtly. More pine and fir, fewer of the massive redwoods and cedars they'd seen at lower elevations. The air grew cooler and clearer. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Benjamin drew the horses to a halt. Below them stretched a small valley, sheltered by mountain peaks on 3 sides. A clear stream wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, and nestled at the forest's edge stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. My home, Benjamin said simply. Not what you're used to in Philadelphia, but it's defensible. It's lovely, Eleanor said truthfully. After the events of the past days, the isolated cabin looked like a sanctuary. As they descended into the valley, Martha Holloway cleared her throat. I know I promised to stay as chaperone, but I'm concerned about my boarding house with everything that's happened. You're worried Montgomery's men might retaliate against you, Benjamin finished for her. A legitimate concern. I can't ask you to risk your safety for my reputation, Eleanor told the older woman. The situation has changed since we made those arrangements. Martha looked relieved. I could return with Joseph running bare when he comes tomorrow. Benjamin mentioned he makes regular supply runs to town. Benjamin nodded. Joseph will see you safely back to Cascade Falls. He knows these mountains better than I do. Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being alone with Benjamin, but practical concerns outweighed conventional propriety. After the attack at the boarding house, her safety depended on remaining hidden, and Benjamin Hayes was clearly skilled at disappearing in these mountains. The cabin proved larger than it had appeared from a distance. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, sturdy handcrafted furniture, and bookshelves filled with volumes on forestry, botany, and natural history. A small kitchen area occupied one corner with 2 doors leading to what Eleanor presumed were bedrooms. "You'll take my room," Benjamin said, opening one door to reveal a simple but comfortable space with a bed, chest of drawers and washstand. "Mrs. Holloway can use the small guest room tonight. I'll sleep out here." Eleanor was struck by the unexpected refinement of Benjamin's home. Though rustic, everything showed careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. The dining table was beautifully carved from a single slab of wood, the chairs designed for comfort as well as function. Copper cookware hung from hooks in the kitchen area, and a collection of detailed sketches of local plants and animals adorned the walls. "You seem surprised," Benjamin commented, noticing her expression as she examined a particularly fine drawing of an elk. "I expected something more primitive," Eleanor admitted. "This is," she gestured at the comfortable, cultured space, "not what you'd expect from a rough mountain man." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "My mother was a teacher. She believed wilderness living was no excuse for neglecting one's mind or surroundings." The mention of his mother, Samuel's mother, reminded Eleanor how little she knew about the family she'd planned to join. "Samuel rarely mentioned your parents in his letters." A shadow crossed Benjamin's face. "They died when we were 20. Influenza." He moved toward the kitchen. "You both must be hungry. I'll prepare something." While Benjamin busied himself with meal preparations and Martha rested in the guest room, Eleanor found herself drawn to the bookshelves. Among the scientific texts and botanical reference books was a slim volume that caught her eye, a collection of pressed flowers and plants, each labeled in a neat hand that matched Samuel's. As she carefully turned the pages, a folded paper slipped from between the leaves. Eleanor opened it to find a detailed map of what appeared to be a section of forest. Locations were marked with symbols she didn't recognize, and notes in the margins referred to specimen locations and core samples. "Where did you find that?" Eleanor started at Benjamin's voice directly behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "It fell from this book." She handed him the map, watching his reaction closely. "Is this what Samuel was referring to?" Benjamin studied the map, his expression growing increasingly intense. "This is part of it. There should be more." He looked up at her. "This is a survey of old-growth forest on the eastern boundary of Samuel's property. He was documenting something specific about these trees. What makes them so valuable, beyond the obvious timber worth?" Benjamin shook his head. "I'm not certain. Samuel was always more interested in the scientific aspects of forestry than I was. But these markings," he pointed to symbols scattered across the map, "these indicate some kind of sampling was done." "Could it be gold?" Martha asked, emerging. "You from the guest room. These mountains have had gold strikes before." "Possibly," Benjamin conceded, "but Samuel wasn't interested in mining. And these sample locations are all tied to specific trees, not rock formations." Eleanor thought back to Samuel's letters, trying to recall any mention of scientific studies or discoveries. He wrote about sustainable forestry practices. Could that be related? Benjamin frowned thoughtfully. Perhaps, but that wouldn't explain Montgomery's desperation to get these maps. He carefully refolded the paper. "This is just one piece of the puzzle. The complete set of maps might tell us more." "Then we need to find them," Eleanor said decisively. "They must still be in Cascade Falls, either at Samuel's house or his office." "Both locations will be watched," Benjamin warned. "Then we'll need a plan to get past the watchers." Eleanor met his surprised look with determination. "I didn't come all this way to hide in the mountains while Samuel's killers go unpunished." A glimmer of respect appeared in Benjamin's eyes. "You're nothing like I expected, Eleanor Wilson." For the first time, he'd used her given name rather than the formal Miss Wilson. The change felt significant somehow. "And what did you expect, Mr. Hayes?" she asked. A city woman looking for a comfortable life as a mill owner's wife, someone who would crumble at the first sign of adversity. His gaze was appraising. I was wrong. Eleanor wasn't sure if she should be flattered or offended. You formed quite an opinion from our brief acquaintance. I formed it before we met, Benjamin admitted. When Samuel wrote that he was bringing a bride from Philadelphia, I pictured someone. He gestured vaguely. Frivolous? Helpless? Eleanor suggested, a hint of edge in her voice. Unsuited to frontier life, he amended diplomatically. Samuel always did have grand ideas about bringing Eastern refinement to the wilderness. And you disapproved. I worried for him, Benjamin corrected. This isn't an easy place for those not born to it. Yet here I am, Eleanor said quietly. Perhaps not as Samuel imagined, but here nonetheless. Something shifted in Benjamin's expression. A softening, a new awareness. The moment stretched between them, strangely intimate. Martha broke the tension by announcing she would help with dinner preparations, and conversation turned to practical matters of their situation. Benjamin outlined security precautions, escape routes, and contingency plans with military precision. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her quick grasp of tactical thinking. Tomorrow, Joseph will bring supplies and take Mrs. Holloway back to town, Benjamin explained as they ate a simple but hearty stew. He can gather information about Montgomery's movements and any news regarding Samuel's death. Sheriff Miller seemed to imply Samuel's accident wasn't suspicious, Eleanor noted. Yet you're convinced it was murder. Miller isn't corrupt, just cautious, Benjamin replied. Without evidence, he won't challenge Montgomery's version of events. And the evidence is in the maps, Eleanor concluded. Or whatever the maps lead to, Benjamin agreed. We need to locate the complete set. After dinner, Benjamin showed them the cabin's defensive features, hidden rifle ports in the walls, a trapdoor leading to a root cellar that could serve as a hiding place, and an escape tunnel that emerged in the forest 50 yards behind the cabin. You built all this for a ranger station? Eleanor asked, impressed despite herself. I built it because I know what men like Montgomery are capable of, Benjamin answered grimly. Preparation has kept me alive more than once. As darkness fell, the isolation of their position became more pronounced. No distant lights from neighboring homes, no sound of passing wagons or city noises, just the profound silence of the wilderness, occasionally broken by the call of a night bird or the rustling of wind through trees. Eleanor stood on the cabin's small porch, breathing in the cool night air and marveling at the brilliant canopy of stars overhead. In Philadelphia, gas lamps and coal smoke obscured all but the brightest stars. Here, the Milky Way spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds. It's overwhelming at first, Benjamin said, joining her on the porch. The silence, the darkness, the stars. It's beautiful, Eleanor replied softly. I can see why Samuel loved it here. Benjamin leaned against the porch railing, his face in shadow. You truly cared for him, didn't you, despite never meeting in person? I did. Eleanor felt no need to dissemble. His letters showed a thoughtful, passionate man with dreams and principles, a man who saw beauty in the world and wanted to preserve it. That was Samuel, Benjamin agreed, his voice gentler than Eleanor had yet heard it. Always the idealist between us. I was the practical one, the skeptic. You're more alike than... You think? Eleanor observed. You both devoted your lives to protecting these forests, just in different ways. Benjamin was silent for a long moment. I should have reconciled with him sooner, he finally said, regret heavy in his voice. 2 years of stubborn silence, and now... You're honoring him by protecting what he valued, Eleanor said, including me, though I was a stranger to you. Not entirely a stranger, Benjamin admitted. Samuel wrote about you in his letters to me before our estrangement. He said you had courage and conviction beneath your proper exterior. Events have proven him right. The compliment warmed Eleanor. Unexpectedly, you've read my letters to Samuel. No, Benjamin said quickly, those were private. After his death, I sealed them with his personal effects. This respect for her privacy raised Benjamin further in Eleanor's estimation. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. We should rest, Benjamin eventually said. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. As Eleanor prepared for bed in Benjamin's room, a strangely intimate act, using his wash basin, sleeping in his bed, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been journeying to marry a man she knew through correspondence. Now she was hiding in a mountain cabin with his twin, pursued by dangerous men, and embroiled in a mystery that had already cost Samuel his life. The practical seamstress from Philadelphia should have been terrified, overwhelmed. Instead, Eleanor felt a peculiar clarity. Samuel was gone, but she could still honor what he stood for by helping Benjamin uncover the truth. She thought of the map they'd discovered, wondering what secrets it contained that were worth killing for. Old-growth forests, valuable timber, sustainable practices. The pieces didn't fully connect yet, but they would. Eleanor had always been good at patterns, at seeing how disparate elements could be brought together to create something meaningful. It was what had made her an exceptional seamstress. And perhaps, she thought as she drifted towards sleep, it would make her an unexpected but effective ally in bringing Samuel's killers to justice. Morning arrived with the cheerful song of birds and golden light filtering through the cabin's windows. Eleanor woke feeling surprisingly refreshed, despite the circumstances. She dressed quickly in her simplest traveling dress, braiding her hair in a practical style better suited to their wilderness location than her usual city coiffure. In the main room, she found Benjamin already awake, studying the map they'd discovered while making notes in a small leather journal. He looked up as she entered, his expression thoughtful. "I've been comparing this to my own maps of the region," he said by way of greeting. "Samuel was documenting specific trees in a pattern I don't yet understand." "Good morning to you too," Eleanor replied with gentle irony. Benjamin blinked, then offered a rueful smile. "My apologies. Social graces tend to fade when one lives alone in the mountains." The smile transformed his face, making the resemblance to Samuel both stronger and somehow more distant. This was purely Benjamin's expression, one she doubted Samuel had ever worn in quite the same way. "Joseph should arrive within the hour," Benjamin continued, returning to practicalities. "He's bringing supplies and will take Mrs. Holloway back to town. I've written a list of information we need him to gather." Eleanor nodded, moving to the kitchen area where she found coffee already prepared. As she poured herself a cup, she noticed charcoal sketches spread on the far end of the table, detailed drawings of tree cross-sections with annotations about growth rings and what appeared to be chemical compositions. "Did you make these?" she asked, examining the technical drawings. "Samuel did," Benjamin replied. "I found them among his papers after his death, part of whatever research he was conducting." Eleanor studied the notations, recognizing Samuel's handwriting, but unable to decipher the scientific terminology. One phrase caught her attention. "Extraordinary medicinal properties confirmed in samples 7 to 12. Potential value exceeds initial estimates." "Benjamin," she said slowly, "I think I know what Samuel discovered." He was instantly at her side, following her finger to the notation. His eyes widened as he read it. "Medicinal properties," he murmured. "Of course. That's why the specific trees were marked." "What does it mean?" Eleanor asked. "It means Samuel found something in these old-growth trees, perhaps in the bark or sap, with medicinal value." Benjamin's mind was clearly racing. If he could prove that these ancient forests had more value standing than cut for timber, He could change how these lands are valued, Eleanor finished, understanding dawning. Provide economic justification for forest preservation, which would destroy Montgomery's plans to clear-cut everything for maximum profit. Benjamin's expression hardened. A discovery like this could revolutionize forestry practices across the territory. No wonder Montgomery wanted him silenced. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. 3 short raps followed by 2 longer ones. "Joseph," Benjamin said, visibly relaxing. He moved to the door, rifle still in hand as a precaution. The man who entered was tall and lean, with copper skin and long black hair tied back with a leather cord. He wore buckskins and carried a rifle with the easy familiarity of one who considers it an extension of himself. His dark eyes took in Eleanor with a single assessing glance before turning to Benjamin. "You have guests, my friend," he said, his English perfect but accented. "The town is buzzing with rumors." "Joseph Running Bear," Benjamin introduced, "my closest ally and the best tracker in 3 territories. Joseph, this is Eleanor Wilson and Martha Holloway." Joseph nodded respectfully to both women. "Montgomery has offered a reward for information about your whereabouts, Miss Wilson. His men are saying you stole valuable property from Samuel Hayes before fleeing town." "That's absurd," Eleanor protested. "I arrived after Samuel's death." "Truth matters little to men like Montgomery," Joseph replied calmly. "He creates the story that serves his purpose." "What about Sheriff Miller?" Benjamin asked. "Has he accepted Montgomery's version?" "Miller is skeptical but constrained by lack of evidence. The man who attacked Miss Wilson at the boarding house has been released, claimed he mistook her room for his own in the darkness." "Convenient," Benjamin muttered. Joseph unloaded supplies from his pack: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, and newspapers from Cascade Falls. "There is more," he said, his expression growing grave. "There are rumors that evidence of foul play was found at the site of Samuel's accident." Benjamin tensed. "What evidence?" "A cut rope, not one that broke from strain. The logger who found it spoke to his wife, who told her sister, who works at the general store." Joseph's face remained impassive. "The logger has since left town unexpectedly." "Paid off or threatened," Benjamin concluded. "Or worse," Joseph agreed quietly. The implications hung heavy in the room. If Montgomery had indeed murdered Samuel and was actively covering his tracks, they were facing a more dangerous adversary than they had realized. "I need to get into Samuel's house," Eleanor said suddenly. "The rest of the maps must be there." "Too dangerous," Benjamin objected immediately. "Montgomery will have men watching." "Which is why it needs to be me," Eleanor insisted. "They're looking for you, Benjamin. Your face is too similar to Samuel's. You'd be recognized instantly. I'm just the mail-order bride who fled town out of grief and fear. If I return claiming I forgot something important, it won't seem suspicious." "It's too risky," Benjamin repeated, but with less certainty. Joseph spoke up. "She may be right. A direct approach, when they expect subterfuge, could succeed where stealth would fail." Benjamin paced the small cabin, clearly torn between the need for the maps and concern for Eleanor's safety. "Even if you gained entry to Samuel's house, you don't know where to look." "In his letters, Samuel mentioned a hidden compartment in his desk," Eleanor revealed. "He said it was where he kept his most important papers." Benjamin stopped pacing, staring at her. "You never mentioned this before." "I didn't think of it until now," Eleanor admitted. "He described it as a clever mechanism that released a secret drawer. Said his father taught him how to build it." Recognition flashed in Benjamin's eyes. "Our father built furniture with hidden compartments. A family tradition." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "If the maps are anywhere, they'd be there." "Then it's settled," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll return to town with Mrs. Holloway and Joseph, retrieve the maps, and come back here." "Not alone," Benjamin insisted. "I'll come as far as Miller's Creek." Joseph can escort you into town, and I'll wait at the creek for your return." Martha, who had remained quiet during much of the discussion, finally spoke up. "I can create a distraction if needed. Perhaps invite Montgomery's watchers in for tea while Eleanor searches Samuel's study." Eleanor smiled gratefully at the older woman. "Thank you, Martha. Your help would be invaluable." As they finalized their plans, Eleanor found herself studying Benjamin's tense profile. His concern for her safety was evident in the tight set of his jaw and the way his eyes kept returning to her face. It was more than the obligation he felt toward his brother's intended bride. Somewhere in their brief acquaintance, a bond had formed between them. It should have troubled her, this growing awareness of Benjamin Hayes as a man distinct from his twin. Instead, Eleanor found it gave her strength. Samuel had chosen her for her courage and intelligence. Now, she would prove worthy of that choice by helping his brother uncover the truth behind his death. And if her heart sometimes beat faster when Benjamin's eyes met hers, if she sometimes found herself wondering what might have been had fate dealt a different hand, well, that was a complication for another time. First, they needed the maps that Samuel had died protecting. Only then could they hope to bring his killers to justice and ensure his discovery wouldn't be lost forever to those who saw forests only as timber to be harvested, not living treasures to be preserved. The journey back to Cascade Falls proved more difficult than the departure. Rain had begun to fall shortly after they left Benjamin's cabin, turning the forest trails to mud that sucked at the wagon wheels and slowed their progress. Eleanor sat beside Joseph running bare on the driver's bench, her shoulders hunched against the drizzle, going over the plan in her mind for the 100th time. They had left Benjamin at Miller's Creek as agreed, though he had clearly been reluctant to let Eleanor continue without him. His final words to her played over in her memory. "If you're not back by nightfall, I'm coming into town after you, regardless of the risk." The intensity in his eyes as he'd said it had stirred something in Eleanor that she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "There will be watchers near the Hayes house," Joseph said, breaking into her thoughts. His voice was low, barely audible above the rain and the creak of wagon wheels. "2 men have been there since Samuel's death. They try to look casual, but they watch too carefully." "Can we avoid them?" Eleanor asked. Joseph shook his head. "Not if you wish to enter through the front, but there is another way." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "Samuel once asked me to repair damage to his roof. There is access through the attic window at the rear of the house." Eleanor stared at him. "You expect me to climb onto the roof?" "I expect nothing," Joseph replied calmly. "I merely offer options." As the outskirts of Cascade Falls came into view through the rain, Eleanor's anxiety intensified. What had seemed like a reasonable plan in the safety of Benjamin's cabin now felt foolhardy. She was no spy, no detective, just a seamstress from Philadelphia thrust into circumstances beyond her experience. Yet Samuel had died protecting something important, something that could change the future of these magnificent forests. She owed it to his memory to at least try. Joseph steered the wagon toward Martha's boarding house rather than directly to Samuel's home, a precaution they had agreed upon to avoid drawing immediate attention. As they pulled up to the rear entrance, Martha squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Remember, dear, if anyone asks, you returned because the wilderness was too much for your delicate constitution, and you realized you'd left behind some personal items at Samuel's house." Eleanor nodded, smoothing her rain-dampened skirts as she descended from the wagon. "I'll meet you at Samuel's house in 1 hour." "I will watch the street," Joseph promised. "If there is danger, I will signal with an owl call." Inside the boarding house, Eleanor quickly changed into dry clothes, her mind racing. The plan was simple in theory. She would go to Samuel's house, ostensibly to collect personal items she had left behind, and while there, search his desk for the hidden compartment containing the maps. Martha would accompany her as propriety demanded, helping to distract any watchers while Eleanor conducted her search. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. A voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Benjamin's answered. An hour later, Eleanor and Martha walked arm in arm down Cascade Falls Main Street towards Samuel's house. The rain had eased to a gentle mist, and the town was coming to life as shopkeepers opened for the day's business. Eleanor kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with passers-by, though she could feel curious gazes following their progress. Samuel's house stood at the end of Pine Street, a well-built two-story structure with a wide front porch and intricate gingerbread trim, more elaborate than Benjamin's cabin, but somehow less substantial. As they approached, Eleanor spotted the watchers Joseph had mentioned, a burly man loitering by the general store across the street and another seated on a bench with a newspaper, though his eyes tracked their movement rather than the printed page. "Courage, dear," Martha murmured as they climbed the porch steps. Eleanor retrieved the key Samuel had sent her from her reticule, her hand trembling slightly as she inserted it into the lock. The door swung open, revealing a home that Eleanor had seen only in her imagination during the months of their correspondence. The foyer opened into a well-appointed parlor with fashionable furniture, paintings of forest scenes adorning the walls, and a massive stone fireplace that reminded her of Benjamin's cabin. Everything was covered with a fine layer of dust, evidence that no one had lived here since Samuel's death. "I'll prepare some tea," Martha said, loud enough to be heard by anyone listening outside. "You gather your things, dear." Eleanor nodded, moving towards the rear of the house where Samuel had mentioned his study was located. She found it easily, a handsome room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk positioned to face the windows, overlooking a garden. Had she married Samuel as planned, she would have sat in this room with him, discussing his work, sharing her day. The poignancy of what might have been struck her anew, but Eleanor pushed the feeling aside. She had a task to complete. The desk was locked, but the key was in the top drawer of a nearby filing cabinet, just as Martha had told her it would be. Samuel had been methodical, a man of systems and order. Eleanor unlocked the desk, her eyes scanning its surface. Paperwork was stacked neatly, including what appeared to be mill business. Invoices, shipping manifests, payroll records. Nothing looked like the scientific notes or maps they sought. Eleanor examined the desk carefully, running her fingers along its edges, looking for any sign of the hidden compartment Samuel had described. The craftsmanship was excellent, joints fitted so precisely that no seams were visible. How had Samuel's father designed the secret mechanism? A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the study. Eleanor froze, heart pounding. "Just me, dear," Martha called. "The kettle is on." Eleanor released her breath slowly, then returned to her examination. Samuel had mentioned the mechanism was clever but simple, something that wouldn't be obvious to a casual observer, but wasn't overly complicated. She tried pressing various decorative elements on the desk's facade, pulling drawers out to different lengths, even looking underneath for hidden buttons or levers. Nothing yielded. Time was passing too quickly. Eleanor could feel panic beginning to rise in her chest. What if she couldn't find it? What if Montgomery's men had already discovered the compartment and taken the maps? In desperation, she sat in Samuel's chair, trying to think as he would have. The desk was positioned to face the windows, the garden view beyond. Samuel had written about working at his desk, watching the birds in his garden as he corresponded. With her, an idea struck her. Eleanor opened the center drawer where Samuel would have kept writing implements. Sure enough, there was an inkwell, pens, a blotter, and a small carved wooden bird, a chickadee, tucked in the back corner. On impulse, Eleanor lifted the bird. It seemed unusually heavy for its size. She turned it over and discovered a small notch on the bottom, as if the carving was meant to fit onto something. Examining the desktop again, Eleanor noticed a nearly invisible seam in the wood just to the right, of where the blotter would normally sit. The shape matched the base of the wooden bird. With trembling fingers, Eleanor placed the chickadee carving onto the spot and pressed gently. There was a soft click, and a panel in the desk side slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. "Martha!" Eleanor called softly, excitement overriding caution. "I found it!" Inside the compartment was a leather portfolio tied with string. Eleanor carefully removed it and united the bindings. Inside were several maps, similar to the one they'd found at Benjamin's cabin, but more detailed. These showed larger sections of forest, with the same mysterious symbols marking specific trees. There were also pages of notes in Samuel's handwriting, chemical, formulas, experimental results, and what appeared to be correspondence with a university professor in San Francisco. One document caught Eleanor's eye, a letter from the professor confirming that extracts from the bark of certain ancient trees on Samuel's property contained compounds with remarkable efficacy against consumption and other pulmonary ailments. The professor's enthusiasm practically leapt off the page. "If your findings can be replicated, Mr. Hayes, you may have discovered a treatment that could save thousands of lives annually." Eleanor's breath caught. This was it, the discovery that had cost Samuel his life. Not gold or timber rights, but medicine that could be harvested sustainably from living trees, providing both economic value and a compelling reason to preserve the ancient forests. She carefully returned the documents to the portfolio, her mind racing. They needed to get these papers to Benjamin and then to the territorial authorities. Evidence not just of Samuel's discovery, but of the motive behind his murder. Eleanor was so focused on securing the portfolio that she almost missed the sound of the front door opening. Heavy footsteps crossed the foyer, followed by a man's voice that was definitely not Martha's. "Mrs. Holloway, what a surprise. I wasn't aware anyone was using the Hayes residence." Eleanor froze, recognizing the name even before Martha's strained reply. "Mr. Montgomery." "Leave that to me, dear. I'll invite those watchers in for tea, claiming you're resting upstairs with a headache." They moved quickly, Martha heading to the front door, while Eleanor made her way to the attic via a narrow back staircase. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with trunks and furniture draped in sheets. Eleanor found the window Joseph had mentioned, small but large enough for her to squeeze through if necessary. She peered out cautiously. The trellis was there, as promised, sturdy enough to support her weight if she was careful. Beyond it lay the back garden, then a narrow alley that connected to a side street. If she could reach that alley unseen, she might make it to their rendezvous point at the livery stable, where Joseph waited with the wagon. From below, Eleanor heard Martha's voice, unnaturally loud, as she invited Montgomery's watchers in for refreshments. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor opened the window and eased one leg over the sill. The portfolio was secure inside her dress, but it made movement awkward. Gripping the window frame tightly, she maneuvered her body outside until she could reach the trellis with her foot. The wood creaked alarmingly under her weight. Eleanor froze, waiting to see if anyone had heard. When no alarm sounded, she continued her descent, grateful for the concealing foliage of the climbing roses, though their thorns caught at her dress and scratched her hands. Halfway down, disaster struck. A section of the trellis pulled away from the wall with a splintering crack. Eleanor clung desperately to the remaining structure as her feet scrambled for purchase. For one terrifying moment, she hung suspended 15 feet above the ground. Then the entire trellis collapsed, taking Eleanor with it. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her ankle as she twisted to protect the precious documents. The breath knocked from her lungs. Eleanor lay amid the shattered remains of the trellis, fighting to remain conscious. "Miss Wilson!" a voice hissed from nearby. "Are you injured?" Joseph materialized from the shrubbery, his face concerned as he helped her sit up. "My ankle," Eleanor gasped. I think it's sprained, but I have the documents. Joseph glanced toward the house, where voices indicated Martha's distraction was still working for the moment. Can you walk? Eleanor tried to stand and nearly collapsed as pain lanced through her ankle. Not quickly. Without hesitation, Joseph lifted her in his arms. Hold tight, he instructed, then set off at a remarkable pace for a man carrying a grown woman, keeping to the shadows of gardens and buildings as he made his way toward the livery stable. They reached the wagon without incident, Joseph settling Eleanor in the back and covering her with a tarp. Stay hidden, he whispered. Once Martha arrives, we leave immediately. Eleanor nodded, clutching the portfolio to her chest as Joseph arranged the tarp to conceal her completely. Through a small gap, she could see a sliver of the stable yard and the street beyond. Minutes stretched endlessly as she waited, every sound making her tense with anticipation. Finally, Martha's voice reached her. Goodness, that was closer than I'd like. Those men were most insistent on searching the house when they realized Eleanor wasn't actually resting upstairs. Were you followed? Joseph asked. I don't believe so. I slipped out the kitchen door while they were searching the attic. The wagon shifted as Martha climbed aboard. Joseph spoke quietly to the horses, and they began to move. Eleanor released the breath she'd been holding, allowing herself a moment of relief. They had the documents and were on their way back to Benjamin. But her relief was short-lived. As the wagon turned onto the main street, there came the sound of hoofbeats rapidly approaching. Riders, Joseph said, his voice tense. 4 of them. Eleanor's heart sank. Their escape had been discovered. Miss Wilson, Montgomery's voice rang out. I know you're in that wagon. Stop immediately or my men will fire. Joseph didn't slow down. Instead, he snapped the reins, urging the horses to greater speed. The wagon lurched forward, throwing Eleanor against its side. Hold tight, Joseph called back. The forest trail is ahead. Once we reach it, they'll have trouble following. A gunshot cracked through the air, followed by another. Eleanor heard a bullet thud into the wagon's wooden side. Martha cried out in alarm. Stay down, Joseph commanded. The wagon swerved sharply, turning off the main road onto a narrow trail that plunged into the forest. The ride became brutally rough as they bounced over roots and rocks at a dangerous speed. Eleanor clung to the wagon sides, still hidden beneath. The tarp, the portfolio, clutched against her chest. More shots sounded behind them, but the dense forest made accuracy difficult for their pursuers. Still, the riders were gaining. The wagon was too slow, too unwieldy for the rough terrain. The creek is just ahead, Joseph shouted over the thunder of hooves and cracking of branches. Benjamin will be waiting. Eleanor's heart leapt at the name. If they could reach Benjamin, they stood a chance. He knew these forests better than Montgomery's men, and he was an experienced fighter. The wagon burst from the trees into a small clearing bisected by a swift-flowing creek. Miller's Creek, where Benjamin had promised to wait. Eleanor peered desperately through the gap in the tarp, searching for any sign of him. The clearing was empty. Where is he? Martha cried, echoing Eleanor's thoughts. Joseph didn't answer, focused on guiding the horses across the creek. The water was higher than usual from the recent rain, the current strong enough to make the crossing treacherous. They were halfway across when the first riders emerged from the forest behind them. A shot rang out, and one of their horses screamed in pain, stumbling to its knees in the creek bed. Out of the wagon! Joseph ordered, leaping down to release the injured horse from its harness. Eleanor threw off the tarp and scrambled out, gasping as her injured ankle hit the ground. Martha helped her to the creek bank, where they crouched, behind a fallen log. Joseph joined them, rifle in hand. Stay here, he said grimly. I will hold them off as long as possible. You can't face 4 armed men alone, Eleanor protested. Joseph's expression was resolute. Benjamin will come. But where was he? Eleanor scanned the forest on the far side of the creek, seeing nothing but trees and undergrowth. Had something happened to him? Or had he simply abandoned them when he realized the danger was greater than anticipated? No, Eleanor refused to believe that. Benjamin Hayes was many things: gruff, cautious, perhaps even ruthless when necessary. But he was not a coward, and he would not break his word. The riders had reached the creek now, spreading out to surround the disabled wagon. One of them was Victor Montgomery himself, a rifle in his hands and a cold smile on his face. "Miss Wilson," he called, "this is your final chance to surrender peacefully. Hand over Samuel's documents, and you may yet leave this territory alive." Joseph answered with a rifle shot that sent Montgomery diving for cover. The other riders returned fire, bullets splintering the log that sheltered Eleanor and Martha. "We need to move," Joseph said tensely. "They are circling around us." Eleanor clutched the portfolio tighter, her mind racing. The documents it contained could save countless lives if Samuel's medicinal discovery proved viable, and protect thousands of acres of ancient forest from Montgomery's saws. She couldn't let them fall into his hands. "You and Martha go," she said suddenly. "I'll draw them away while you get help." "Absolutely not," Martha replied fiercely. "Miss Wilson, I promised Benjamin," Joseph began. A fusillade of shots interrupted him, forcing them all lower behind their meager shelter. One of Montgomery's men had worked his way to a position with a clear line of fire. They were pinned down with no route of escape. "It's me they want," Eleanor insisted. "The documents. If I surrender, you can both escape and find Benjamin." "And what would I tell him?" Joseph asked, his eyes never leaving the positions of their attackers. "That I left his brother's bride to Montgomery's mercy. He would kill me himself. Brother's bride." The word struck Eleanor with unexpected force. She was not Samuel's bride, would never be now, yet she felt a responsibility to him, to his vision, and increasingly a connection to Benjamin that went beyond their shared goal of justice. "Then what do we do?" she asked, desperation edging her voice. Before Joseph could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the air, not from Montgomery's men, but from the forest behind them. Joseph's head snapped up, a fierce grin splitting his face. "He comes," he said simply. Eleanor turned in time to see Benjamin emerge from the trees 50 yards downstream, rifle raised. He fired once, twice, with deadly accuracy. One of Montgomery's men cried out, clutching his shoulder. Another lost his hat to a bullet that had passed so close it left a groove in the crown. "Hayes!" Montgomery bellowed. "This doesn't concern you!" "You murdered my brother," Benjamin called back, his voice cold as steel. "That makes it very much my concern." He moved like a shadow through the forest, firing and relocating before Montgomery's men could fix his position. Joseph seized the opportunity to pick off another of the attackers, the man falling with a cry from his horse into the shallow creek. Montgomery, realizing his position was deteriorating rapidly, shouted orders to his remaining man. They retreated across the creek, firing wildly to cover their withdrawal. "Eleanor!" Benjamin appeared suddenly beside her, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" "Just my ankle," she replied, relief washing over her. "Benjamin, I have..." Them, Samuel's maps, his research notes, everything. A fierce joy lit his eyes, swiftly replaced by caution as a bullet struck too close for comfort. "Explanations later. We need to move now. Montgomery will bring more men." Without further discussion, Benjamin lifted Eleanor into his arms, cradling her with surprising gentleness despite the urgency of the situation. Joseph helped Martha onto the remaining horse from their wagon team, and they set off deeper into the forest, away from the creek and the road back to Cascade Falls. They traveled in tense silence for almost an hour, Benjamin carrying Eleanor, as if she weighed nothing, his breathing steady despite the exertion. Finally, they reached a small cave partially hidden by a waterfall, another of Benjamin's prepared refuges. "We'll be safe here temporarily," Benjamin said, carefully setting Eleanor down on a flat rock inside the cave. Joseph, watch the approach. Martha, there are medical supplies in my pack. As Martha tended to Eleanor's ankle, binding it firmly with strips of cloth, Benjamin finally asked the question, burning in his eyes. Did you find what Samuel was protecting? Eleanor nodded, retrieving the portfolio from inside her dress. It's all here. Maps of the old-growth forests, scientific notes, correspondence with a professor in San Francisco. She handed him the most significant letter. Read this. Benjamin scanned the document, his expression growing increasingly intense. A cure for consumption, he murmured. Harvested sustainably from living trees without harming them. Not just a cure, Eleanor added, a reason to preserve the forests that even the most profit-minded businessman would have to acknowledge. The medicinal compounds are only found in trees centuries old, trees that would take generations to replace if cut. This is what Montgomery was willing to kill for, Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just timber rights, but control of a medicine that could be worth millions, Eleanor nodded, and proof of your brother's vision that these forests have more value standing than felled. Benjamin carefully returned the documents to the portfolio, his hands gentle, with what represented his brother's legacy. When he looked up at Eleanor, the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. You risked your life for this, he said quietly, for Samuel's work. For what was right, Eleanor corrected. Samuel saw something worth protecting. I couldn't let Montgomery destroy that. A complicated emotion crossed Benjamin's face, perhaps recognition that Eleanor's connection to Samuel had been real and meaningful, not merely the arrangement of convenience he had initially assumed. We need to get these documents to people who can protect them and act on them, Benjamin said, turning to Joseph, the territorial governor, the university in San Francisco. Joseph nodded. Montgomery will have men watching all roads out of the region, and he has friends in positions of authority. Not all authorities, Benjamin replied thoughtfully. Sheriff Miller may be cautious, but he's honest, and Judge Harmon arrives next week for the circuit court session. We have to hold out until then, Eleanor realized. Keep the documents safe and stay alive long enough to present them to the judge. Montgomery won't give up easily, Martha warned. Not with what's at stake. Benjamin's expression hardened with resolve. Neither will we. He turned to Eleanor, his gaze softening. You should have stayed at the cabin as I asked, but I'm grateful. You didn't. The simple admission warmed Eleanor more than it should have. Samuel would have wanted his work preserved, she said softly. I did what he would have expected of the woman he chose. Benjamin held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them, before turning back to the practical matters at hand. We'll rest here until nightfall, then continue to a more secure location. Joseph knows of a mining claim in the high country that was abandoned last year. The cabin there is remote enough that Montgomery's men won't find it easily. As they made preparations for the night journey ahead, Eleanor found herself watching Benjamin. The economy of his movements, the quiet competence with which he tended to necessities, the protective glances he cast her way when he thought she wasn't looking. He was so like Samuel in appearance, yet increasingly distinct in her mind. Where Samuel had been idealistic and open, Benjamin was pragmatic and guarded. Samuel had believed in systems and authorities. Benjamin trusted his own judgment and abilities. Yet both brothers shared a fundamental integrity, a devotion to the forests they had made their life's work. Eleanor wondered what Samuel would think of this unexpected turn of events, his intended bride joining forces with the twin brother from whom he had been estranged. Would he approve of their growing connection, or would he see it as a betrayal of his memory? Questions without answers, Eleanor thought, as darkness fell and they prepared to move on. One thing was certain, She had crossed a continent to marry a man she knew only through letters, only to find herself fighting alongside his twin to protect his legacy. Life had taken an unimaginable turn, yet Eleanor couldn't bring herself to regret the path that had led her here, to this cave in the wilderness, to this mission that had given her purpose beyond being someone's wife, to this man who looked at her with growing respect and something that might, given time, become more. The future remained uncertain, fraught with danger as long as Montgomery pursued them, but Eleanor had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed, and perhaps if they survived the days ahead, a chance for a life she'd never imagined. Dawn broke over the abandoned mining cabin with tendrils of mist clinging to the surrounding pines. Eleanor stood at the single window, the portfolio of documents clutched to her chest, watching as Benjamin and Joseph conferred in the clearing outside. Their breath formed small clouds in the chill morning air as they gestured toward the valley below and the mountains beyond. 3 days had passed since their escape from Montgomery's men at Miller's Creek. 3 days of constant vigilance, of moving only at night, of jumping at every unexpected sound. The mining cabin was their third hideout, each more remote than the last. This one perched on a ledge halfway up the north face of Eagle Mountain, accessible only by a narrow, winding trail that even the most experienced rider would find challenging. Eleanor's ankle had improved enough that she could walk short distances, though Benjamin insisted on carrying her over rough terrain, a solicitousness that had begun to feel less like obligation and more like genuine concern. Martha approached, offering a tin cup of coffee. "You should sit, dear. That ankle needs rest." Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully but remained standing. "I keep thinking about what happens next. Even if we reach Judge Harmon with these documents, will it be enough? Montgomery has influence, connections." "The truth has power of its own," Martha replied, her weathered face serene despite the circumstances. "Samuel believed that. So must we." The door opened as Benjamin entered, bringing with him the scent of pine and wood smoke. His face was grave as he joined the women near the hearth. "Joseph spotted riders in the valley," he announced without preamble. 8 men, heavily armed. Montgomery's escalating his search. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the portfolio. "How did they track us this far?" "They haven't found us yet," Benjamin clarified. "They're searching systematically, working their way up from the foothills. But it's only a matter of time before they try this trail. Then we keep moving," Eleanor said decisively. "Higher into the mountains." Benjamin shook his head. "There's nowhere to go that wouldn't leave us trapped if they find our trail. And the weather's turning. There's a storm coming from the west. We could be snowed in for days." "What options do we have?" Martha asked. Benjamin's expression grew thoughtful. "Judge Harmon arrives in Cascade Falls tomorrow for the circuit court session. If we could get the documents to him directly, bypass Montgomery's influence." "Montgomery will have the roads watched," Eleanor pointed out, "and I can't exactly walk into the courthouse unnoticed." "No," Benjamin agreed, "but I might be able to reach Sheriff Miller. For all his caution, he's an honest man. If I could convince him to bring the judge here, away from Montgomery's sphere of influence." "That's a considerable risk," Martha said, concern evident in her voice. "Returning to Cascade Falls when Montgomery's men are actively hunting you." "It's our best chance," Benjamin insisted. "Joseph can remain here to protect you both. I'll go alone tonight when darkness provides some cover." Eleanor felt a cold dread at the thought of Benjamin facing such danger alone. "And if Montgomery's men catch you, if this is a trap?" A muscle worked in Benjamin's jaw. "Then you'll need to find another way to get those documents to Judge Harmon." His eyes held hers steadily. "Eleanor, those papers are more important than any of us. They're Samuel's legacy, proof of his vision and of Montgomery's crimes." "I know that," Eleanor replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But I won't sacrifice you to preserve them. There must be another way." Benjamin's expression softened slightly at her concern. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Eleanor thought for a moment, her mind working through possibilities. What if we create a diversion, something to draw Montgomery's men away while one of us gets through to the judge? What kind of diversion?" Benjamin asked, his interest clearly piqued. "A false trail?" Eleanor said, warming to her idea. "Joseph could lead some of Montgomery's men on a chase while you approach Cascade Falls from another direction, and I could create a third option they wouldn't expect." "Absolutely not," Benjamin said immediately, understanding her implication. "You're not putting yourself at risk again." "I'm already at risk," Eleanor pointed out reasonably. "We all are, and Montgomery would never expect me to return to town openly. For good reason. It would be suicide." "Not if I had protection," Eleanor countered. "Not if I went directly to where Montgomery couldn't touch me without witnesses." Martha spoke up, her eyes brightening with understanding. "The church, Sunday services tomorrow morning. Half the town will be there, including Judge Harmon if he's arrived. Even Montgomery wouldn't dare make a move in front of the entire congregation." Benjamin stared at them both as if they'd lost their minds. "You're suggesting Eleanor simply walks into the church as if she's attending Sunday service, with Montgomery's men watching every approach to town?" "That's precisely why it might work," Eleanor insisted. "They're looking for someone hiding, sneaking, trying to avoid detection, not someone walking openly down the main street in her Sunday best." "It's too dangerous," Benjamin repeated, but with less conviction. Eleanor stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Benjamin, trust me as your brother did. I can do this." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition perhaps that she was not simply Samuel's intended bride anymore, but a woman making her own choices, taking her own risks for a cause she believed in. "We would need to coordinate precisely," he said finally. "Joseph creating one diversion, me another, you approaching from a third direction. The timing would have to be perfect." "Then let's make it perfect," Eleanor replied, relief washing over her that he was at least considering the plan. They spent the remainder of the day refining their strategy. Joseph would create a false trail leading east, drawing off as many of Montgomery's men as possible. Benjamin would approach from the north, making himself visible just long enough to pull any remaining searchers in his direction before doubling back toward the church by a hidden route. Eleanor, accompanied by Martha, would take the most direct trail down to Cascade Falls, timing their arrival to coincide with the beginning of Sunday services. "Once inside the church," Benjamin explained, "ask specifically for Judge Harmon. Show him the documents, tell him everything. The church is neutral ground. Montgomery won't dare make a move against you there, not with the entire town as witness." "And after the service?" Eleanor asked the question they'd all been avoiding. Benjamin's expression was grim. "By then, I'll be in position near the church. Once you've given the documents to the judge, I'll get you out of town." The plan was fraught with risk, depending on perfect timing and the assumption that Montgomery would follow predictable patterns. But as Benjamin had said, it was their best chance, perhaps their only chance, to get Samuel's discovery to the authorities before Montgomery's men found their hideout. As dusk approached, Joseph left to begin laying the false trail that would hopefully draw Montgomery's men eastward by morning. Benjamin spent the evening checking and rechecking his weapons, his expression growing increasingly tense as the hour of departure approached. Eleanor found him outside the cabin just before midnight, staring at the stars scattered across the clear mountain sky. The coming storm Benjamin had predicted was still just a dark smudge on the western horizon. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "Tomorrow will test us all." "I couldn't sleep," Eleanor admitted, pulling her shawl tighter against the mountain chill. Too many thoughts. Benjamin nodded, understanding in his silence. After a moment he spoke again, his voice low. "I've been thinking about Samuel, about what he would make of all this." The mention of his brother's name hung in the air between them. Eleanor had been careful to speak of Samuel only in the context of his work, aware of the complicated emotions his memory must evoke for Benjamin. "He would be proud," she said softly, "of what you're doing to protect his discovery." "And of you," Benjamin added, turning to face her. The moonlight silvered his features, making him look almost ethereal. "Samuel chose well when he asked you to share his life." The simple acknowledgement touched Eleanor deeply. "I like to think we would have been happy together," she said honestly. "His letters showed a man of principle and vision, qualities I've come to see in his brother as well." Benjamin's expression grew troubled. "Eleanor, She raised a hand to stop him. "Don't say it. Whatever it is, it can wait until after tomorrow, until we know we've succeeded." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "After," he agreed. "When this is finished, one way or another." The weight of unspoken words hung between them as they stood beneath the vast canopy of stars. Eleanor felt a pull toward him that had nothing to do with his resemblance to Samuel and everything to do with the man Benjamin had revealed himself to be. Principled, protective, courageous, in his own understated way. They returned to the cabin, in silence, each aware that the coming day would test not just their plan, but the bond that had formed between them. A bond complicated by grief, duty, and the ghost of a man they had both loved in different ways. Morning arrived with the first spatters of rain from the approaching storm. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best remaining gown, a blue merino wool that had survived the journey from Philadelphia relatively unscathed. Martha helped her arrange her hair into a neat chignon appropriate for church services. "Remember," Benjamin instructed as they prepared to depart, "keep the portfolio hidden until you're inside the church. Approach Judge Harmon directly after the service or during it if absolutely necessary. He'll be seated near the front with other town officials." "I remember," Eleanor assured him, securing the portfolio under her cloak. "Benjamin," she hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "Be careful. I couldn't bear it if—" "I'll be careful," he promised, his hand briefly covering hers. "Wait for my signal after the service before leaving the church." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, a world of unspoken emotions passing between them. Then Benjamin was gone, slipping into the forest to begin his part of their desperate plan. The descent from the mining cabin was arduous, the trail slick with the light rain that continued to fall. Eleanor's ankle protested with each step, but she pushed through the pain, focusing on the importance of their mission. By mid-morning, they had reached the foothills. From a ridge overlooking Cascade Falls, they could see smoke rising from chimneys and the church steeple standing proud against the gray sky. People were already gathering for the 10 o'clock service, moving along the streets like miniature figures in a clockwork display. "No sign of Montgomery's men," Martha observed, scanning the approaches to town. "Joseph's diversion must be working." Eleanor nodded, though anxiety still knotted her stomach. The plan depended on so many factors beyond their control. The weather, the movements of Montgomery's searchers, Benjamin's ability to create a second diversion if needed. "It's time," she said, gathering her resolve. "We need to reach the church." Just as the service is beginning, they descended the final slope to the outskirts of town, abandoning any pretense of concealment. Eleanor straightened her spine and adopted the purposeful stride of a woman with every right to be walking openly to Sunday services. Martha matched her pace, her expression serene despite the tension Eleanor knew she must be feeling. They encountered no one until they reached the first houses on the edge of town. A woman Eleanor recognized from her brief stay at the boarding house looked startled to see them, but offered a polite good morning. Two children ran past, late for services. A dog barked lazily from a front porch. The normalcy of it all was surreal after days of hiding in the wilderness. Eleanor half expected armed men to emerge from every alleyway, but the streets remained peaceful, with only the occasional latecomer hurrying toward the white-clapboard church at the town center. The church bell tolled the hour as they approached, its clear notes cutting through the soft patter of rain. People were filing inside, shaking out umbrellas and greeting neighbors. Eleanor scanned the gathering for any sign of Montgomery or his men, but saw only familiar townspeople. "Almost there," Martha murmured encouragingly. They had just reached the church steps when Eleanor felt it, the weight of a stare, intense and malevolent. She turned slightly to see Victor Montgomery himself standing across the street, his expression a mask of barely contained fury. Beside him was one of his men, hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to continue up the steps, her eyes fixed on the church doors now just yards away. Safety lay beyond those doors. Witnesses, Judge Harmon, the protection of public scrutiny. Montgomery made no move to stop her, though his gaze promised retribution later. Eleanor suspected he was too careful to create a scene before Sunday services, too aware of appearances to reveal his true nature before the town's respectable citizens. The church interior was warm and fragrant with beeswax candles. Nearly every pew was filled, the congregation a sea of Sunday finery. At the front, as Benjamin had predicted, sat a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, who could only be Judge Harmon. Beside him was Sheriff Miller, his weathered face solemn as he listened to the minister's opening. Words. Eleanor and Martha slipped into a pew near the back, drawing curious glances from those nearby. The weight of the portfolio pressed against Eleanor's side, a tangible reminder of what was at stake. The service proceeded with agonizing slowness. Hymns were sung, prayers offered, scriptures read. Eleanor participated mechanically, her attention fixed on the judge and the moment when she could approach him with the evidence of Samuel's discovery and Montgomery's crimes. Halfway through the minister's sermon, the church doors opened quietly. Eleanor tensed, expecting Montgomery, but it was Benjamin who slipped inside, hair damp from the rain, face tight with controlled urgency. He caught her eye briefly, giving an almost imperceptible nod before taking a position near the door. His presence both reassured and alarmed her. If Benjamin had abandoned his diversion to come to the church, something had changed. Their carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling. The sermon finally ended, and the congregation rose for the closing hymn. Eleanor knew this was her moment. As soon as the final notes faded, she would need to move quickly to reach Judge Harmon before Montgomery could intervene. But as the organist struck the first chord, the church doors burst open with a bang that silenced the congregation mid-verse. 4 armed men stormed in, led by Montgomery's foreman, his face twisted with malicious triumph. "There they are," he shouted, pointing directly at Eleanor and Martha, "the thieves who stole Mr. Montgomery's property." Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted in protest at the armed intrusion into their sanctuary. Sheriff Miller leapt to his feet, hand moving to his pistol. "What is the meaning of this?" the minister demanded from the pulpit, his voice cutting through the tumult. Montgomery himself entered, his manner deceptively calm as he addressed the shocked congregation. "My deepest apologies for this disruption, Reverend. Sheriff Miller, I'm here to report a theft. That woman," he pointed at Eleanor, "stole valuable documents from Samuel Hayes's house, property that legally belongs to me as his primary creditor." Eleanor felt fury rise within her. "That's a lie," she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. "Samuel Hayes left those documents to me. They prove Montgomery had him murdered to prevent his discovery from becoming public." Gasps rippled through the congregation at this accusation. Judge Harmon rose to his feet, his authoritative presence commanding immediate attention. "These are serious allegations, he stated, his voice resonant with judicial gravity. Sheriff, I suggest we adjourn to your office to examine these claimed documents and determine their rightful ownership. An excellent suggestion, Your Honor, Montgomery agreed smoothly. I'm confident once you review the papers, you'll see. My claim is legitimate. Eleanor clutched the portfolio tighter. These documents contain evidence of a medical discovery that could save thousands of lives and prove Montgomery's motive for murder. I won't hand them over to the man who killed Samuel Hayes. Benjamin moved then, stepping forward from his position near the door. Judge Harmon, I'm Benjamin Hayes, Samuel's brother. I can confirm Miss Wilson's account. My brother discovered that certain old-growth trees contain compounds effective against consumption. Montgomery wanted that discovery suppressed because it would prevent him from clear-cutting forests for timber. Montgomery's mask of civility slipped momentarily, naked hatred flashing in his eyes. Hayes has been harassing me for years with baseless accusations. He's clearly poisoned this woman's mind with his paranoid fantasies. Then you won't object to Judge Harmon examining the evidence, Benjamin challenged. Before Montgomery could respond, one of his men moved suddenly toward. Eleanor, Benjamin reacted instantly, placing himself between them. That's far enough, he warned, hand hovering near his concealed pistol. Sheriff Miller intervened, his voice cutting through the tension. No one's drawing weapons in this church. Montgomery, control your men. Judge Harmon and I will examine these documents independently and determine their significance. He turned to Eleanor. Miss Wilson, would you accompany us to my office? This was exactly what they had hoped for, an opportunity to present the evidence to legitimate authorities. Yet Eleanor hesitated, aware of the danger still posed by Montgomery and his men. Even with Sheriff Miller present, the walk to his office would leave them vulnerable. Benjamin saw her hesitation and understood its cause. Sheriff, he said, given the accusations of murder being made, perhaps it would be wiser to examine the documents here in the presence of witnesses. To ensure complete transparency, Judge Harmon nodded approvingly. A sensible precaution. Reverend, might we use your office for this purpose? The congregation can remain if they wish to witness these proceedings. The minister agreed readily, and within minutes, Eleanor found herself in the small church office with Judge Harmon, Sheriff Miller, Benjamin, and, unfortunately but unavoidably, Victor Montgomery. The portfolio lay open on the desk between them, its contents spread out for examination. Judge Harmon studied the documents with meticulous care, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read the scientific reports, examined the maps, and reviewed the correspondence with the professor in San Francisco. These appear genuine, he finally said, looking up at Montgomery. And they clearly establish that Samuel Hayes had made a potentially revolutionary medical discovery derived from old-growth forests. Montgomery's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. I don't dispute Hayes had some scientific interests. I merely assert that as his creditor, his business assets legally transfer to me upon his death. These are not business assets, Benjamin argued. They're personal scientific research that Samuel specifically left to Miss Wilson's care. Do you have documentation of that claim? Judge Harmon asked Eleanor. She shook her head. Only Samuel's letters indicating his intention to show me these maps and his discovery upon my arrival. But he died before he could do so. Conveniently for some, Benjamin added, his gaze fixed accusingly on Montgomery. Judge Harmon's shrewd eyes moved between the parties. Sheriff Miller, what was the official determination regarding Samuel? Hayes's death? Miller shifted uncomfortably. Logging accident. A support rope snapped while he was inspecting a timber operation. And was there a thorough investigation? As thorough as circumstances permitted, Miller replied carefully, though there have been rumors since then, suggestions that the rope may have been deliberately weakened. Montgomery's face darkened. Malicious gossip spread by those with grudges against me. Then you won't object to the case being reopened, Judge Harmon stated rather than asked. In light of this new context regarding Hayes's discovery, for the first time Montgomery appeared genuinely alarmed. On what grounds? You have no evidence connecting me to any foul play? Perhaps not directly, Judge Harmon conceded, but these documents establish a compelling motive. And motive, Mr. Montgomery, is often where investigations begin. He turned to Sheriff Miller. I'm ordering the exhumation of Samuel Hayes's body for a more thorough examination. Additionally, these documents will be registered with the Territorial Patent Office to protect Hayes's discovery. Eleanor felt a surge of relief, so powerful her knees nearly buckled. Benjamin moved closer to her side, his presence steadying. This is outrageous, Montgomery sputtered. You're overstepping your authority, Harmon. On the contrary, the judge replied coolly. I'm exercising it precisely as intended to ensure justice is served, regardless of the wealth or influence of those involved. He gathered the documents, returning them to the portfolio. These will remain in official custody until ownership is legally determined. Miss Wilson, I'll need a formal statement from you regarding Samuel Hayes's intentions. Montgomery's face had gone from red to white, his composure cracking as he saw his plans unraveling. You won't get away with this, he hissed at Benjamin. None of you will. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Montgomery. I suggest you consider your words and actions very carefully. His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Judge Harmon is under my protection while in Cascade Falls, as are Miss Wilson and Mr. Hayes. Montgomery glared at them all, then stormed from the room without another word. Through the window, Eleanor saw him gather his men, gesturing angrily as he spoke to them in hushed tones before they all mounted their horses and rode away. He'll be back, Benjamin said quietly, with more men once he's regrouped. Judge Harmon nodded. Grimly, likely so, Sheriff. I suggest you deputize some trusted men immediately. We may need to defend the town if Montgomery decides to take matters into his own hands. Already planned to, Miller replied. Got 6 men I trust with my life who'll stand with us. Eleanor looked between the men, realizing this was far from over. They had succeeded in getting the documents to the proper authorities, but Montgomery was not a man to accept defeat. The threat to their lives remained very real. What happens now? She asked. Judge Harmon's expression was resolute. Now, Miss Wilson, we prepare for whatever comes next. I've sent for federal marshals, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days. Until then, we hold our ground and protect what Samuel Hayes discovered. He turned to Benjamin. Your brothers' work could change the future of medicine and forestry alike. That's a legacy worth defending, whatever the cost. Benjamin's hand found Eleanor's, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate. We'll defend it, he promised, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that conveyed far more than his words. Together. As they left the church office to face whatever came next, Eleanor was acutely aware of Benjamin beside her, of the strength and purpose they had found in their shared mission. Samuel's death had brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. His legacy lived on, not just in the documents they had risked their lives to protect, but in the bond that had formed between the woman he had chosen as his bride and the twin brother from whom he had been estranged. The rain had stopped, though dark clouds still hung low over Cascade Falls. Outside the church, townspeople gathered in anxious clusters, news of Montgomery's threats and Judge Harmon's decisions spreading rapidly. Sheriff Miller was already organizing his deputies, distributing weapons, and establishing defensive positions. A storm was coming, figuratively and literally. But for the first time since learning of Samuel's death, Eleanor felt a sense of hope. The truth was emerging. Justice might yet be served. And by her side stood a man whose courage and integrity matched his brother's, though expressed in a different form. Whatever Montgomery planned next, they would face it together. And in that knowledge, Eleanor found an unexpected strength. Not just the borrowed courage of desperation, but the deep-rooted resilience of a woman who had discovered her own power in the crucible of danger and loss. Sheriff Miller's office had become a fortress. Men with rifles stood at each window, watching the approaching darkness with grim determination. Judge Harmon sat at the desk, examining Samuel's documents by lamplight, making careful notes in a leather-bound journal. Eleanor moved among the defenders, distributing coffee and food that Martha had organized from townspeople willing to support their stand against Montgomery. "Riders coming," called one of the deputies from his post by the window. "At least a dozen from the South Road." Benjamin joined the deputy, peering through the gathering gloom. "Montgomery," he confirmed, his voice tight. "And he's brought reinforcements, hired guns from the look of them." Sheriff Miller checked his pocket watch. "Sun sets in 20 minutes. They'll wait until dark before making a move." "We should evacuate the women," suggested a gray-haired deputy. "Get them to safety before—" "I'm staying," Eleanor interrupted, firmly. "These men are here because of me, because of what Samuel entrusted to me. I won't abandon that responsibility now." Benjamin's eyes met hers across the room, a complex mixture of pride and concern in his gaze. They had barely spoken since leaving the church, both focused on preparations for Montgomery's inevitable return. Yet Eleanor felt his awareness of her like a physical presence, a connection that transcended words. "Miss Wilson has earned the right to make that choice," Judge Harmon stated, looking up from his work. "Her courage has already saved valuable research that could benefit thousands." Sheriff Miller nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but you stay away from the windows, and if shooting starts, you get below the desk immediately. Understood?" Eleanor agreed, though she had no intention of cowering while others risked their lives. She'd come too far, survived too much, to hide now when the final confrontation approached. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Outside, Montgomery's men took positions around the sheriff's office, their movements visible in the last light of day. They made no attempt at concealment, a show of force intended to intimidate. "They're trying to wait us out," Benjamin observed. "Make us nervous, wear down our resolve." Judge Harmon finished his examination of the documents, carefully returning them to the portfolio and sealing it with the territorial court's ribbon and wax. "These are now officially evidence in a territorial investigation," he announced. "Anyone attempting to destroy or steal them will face federal charges." A formality, Eleanor knew, but one that might give Montgomery pause. If he attacked now, he would be openly defying territorial law. Darkness fell completely, the town quieting as most residents locked themselves inside their homes, away from the brewing conflict. Oil lamps cast pools of golden light through the office windows, making the defenders easy targets, while concealing those who waited outside. "Douse the lamps," Sheriff Miller ordered. "No sense making it easy for them." The room plunged into darkness. Eleanor moved carefully to Benjamin's side, guided by his outline against the faint starlight coming through the window. "You should rest," he murmured. "It could be a long night." "I doubt I could sleep," she replied honestly, "not knowing they're out there, waiting." His hand found hers in the darkness, a gentle pressure that conveyed more than words could express. "When this is over," he began, his voice low and meant only for her. "Don't," Eleanor interrupted softly. "Don't make promises neither of us knows we can keep." Benjamin was silent for a moment. Then, "It's not a promise, it's a certainty." His fingers tightened around hers. "Eleanor, A shot rang out, shattering the window beside them. Benjamin pulled Eleanor to the floor as glass rained down around them. More shots followed in quick succession, bullets thudding into the wooden walls of the office. "Return fire," Sheriff Miller shouted, "but make your shots count." The defenders answered with disciplined volleys, aiming at muzzle flashes in the darkness. Eleanor crawled to where Martha had taken shelter behind a filing cabinet, ensuring the older woman was unharmed. "So much for Montgomery's respect for the law," Judge Harmon commented dryly, now crouched behind the heavy desk. The exchange of gunfire continued for several minutes, then subsided into an uneasy silence. No casualties on their side, though. One deputy had suffered a graze to his arm. Whether they had hit any of Montgomery's men was impossible to tell in the darkness. "They're regrouping," Benjamin predicted, reloading his rifle. "That was just to test our defenses." He was proven right moments later when a voice called out from the darkness, "Hayes, Wilson, you've got one chance to surrender those documents and leave town alive. Montgomery's offering safe passage in exchange." "And we're supposed to trust the word of a murderer?" Benjamin called back, "You're outnumbered and surrounded. Be reasonable." Sheriff Miller joined the exchange. "This is territorial law enforcement. Anyone continuing this assault will face hanging." Laughter answered him. "Not if there's no one left to testify." The threat hung in the air, chilling in its implication. Montgomery had moved beyond legal maneuvering to open violence. He intended to leave no witnesses. Another volley of shots struck the building, more concentrated this time, targeting the windows and door. The defenders returned fire, the exchange more intense than before. In the midst of the chaos, Eleanor noticed a flicker of orange light from the direction of the livery stable. At first, she thought it was muzzle flashes, but the glow grew steadily brighter. "Fire!" she shouted, pointing. "They've set the stable on fire!" Benjamin saw it too, his expression grim. "It's upwind of us. If it spreads..." The implications were clear. If the surrounding buildings caught fire, they would be forced to abandon their shelter or burn with it. "Diversion!" Sheriff Miller growled. "They'll rush us when we're distracted by the fire." Judge Harmon's face was set with determination. "We need reinforcements. Is there any way to get word to neighboring settlements?" "Joseph," Benjamin said suddenly. He was watching the northern approaches. "If he sees the fire, he'll know something's wrong." "One man won't be enough against Montgomery's crew," a deputy pointed out. "Joseph isn't just one man," Benjamin replied. "He has connections with the hunting parties from the reservation. If he can reach them..." It was a slim hope, but better than none. The fire was spreading rapidly, the dry wooden buildings of Cascade Falls perfect fuel for the flames. Townspeople emerged from their homes, forming bucket brigades to fight the blaze, but their efforts seemed futile against the growing inferno. "They're moving closer," warned one of the deputies, "using the fire as cover." Eleanor could see shadowy figures advancing through the smoke, keeping low as they approached the sheriff's office from multiple directions. Their defenders were pinned down, unable to effectively target the approaching men without exposing themselves. "We need to create our own diversion," Eleanor said suddenly. "Something to disrupt their advance." Benjamin looked at her sharply. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor's mind raced. "The ammunition store. It's in the back room, isn't it?" She turned to Sheriff Miller. "If we set off some of those rounds, it would create confusion, make them think they're being fired upon from behind." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's either brilliant or suicidal." "I can reach the storeroom through the holding cells," Eleanor insisted. "Set up enough cartridges to create a distraction, then get back here before they realize what's happening." Benjamin shook his head emphatically. "Too dangerous. I'll go." "They're watching your every move," Eleanor argued. "But they might not be tracking mine as closely." Before Benjamin could protest further, a burning brand crashed through one of the broken windows, landing on the wooden floor. Martha quickly smothered it with a blanket, but it was clear their situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Go!" Judge Harmon ordered Eleanor. "Quickly while we cover you." Benjamin's expression was anguished, but he nodded once, accepting the tactical necessity. "Be careful," he said intensely. "Come straight back at the first sign of trouble." Eleanor slipped into the narrow hallway leading to the holding cells, her heart pounding. The back of the building was less heavily damaged, the small windows intact. Through them, she could see the fire had engulfed the livery stable completely and was spreading to adjacent buildings. The town's bucket brigade was fighting desperately to contain it. The ammunition store was a small closet off the final holding cell. Inside, she found boxes of cartridges for the deputies' rifles and pistols. Working quickly, Eleanor arranged several boxes near the rear window, creating a trail of powder between them. One spark would set off a chain reaction that would sound like a fusillade of shots. As she worked, she could hear the gunfire continuing at the front of the building, more intense now as Montgomery's men drew closer. Time was running out. Eleanor had just finished her preparations when she heard a floorboard creak behind her. She whirled to find Victor Montgomery himself standing in the doorway, pistol aimed directly at her heart. "Miss Wilson," he said, his voice coldly triumphant, "I thought you might try something clever." He gestured with the pistol, "Step away from those ammunition boxes." Eleanor raised her hands slowly, mind racing for a way out of this trap. "How did you get in?" "The building next door has a connecting basement," Montgomery replied with a thin smile, an oversight in the sheriff's defenses. He moved closer, keeping the pistol trained on her. "Now tell me where Hayes put those documents. The scientific notes, the maps." "Judge Harmon has them," Eleanor said truthfully. Montgomery's smile disappeared. "Unfortunate for the judge, then. He'll be among the tragic casualties when this building burns." His eyes were flat, devoid of humanity. Such a terrible accident. The brave sheriff and his men, the distinguished judge, all lost while trying to save the town from fire. "You won't get away with this," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The territorial authorities know about Samuel's discovery now." "Discoveries can be lost," Montgomery countered. "Research destroyed in tragic circumstances. By the time anyone investigates further, those old-growth forests will be lumber, and I'll own the only supply of Hayes's miracle cure." He gestured with the pistol again. "Now move. We're going to find those documents." Eleanor took a step forward, then another, mind working frantically. She was just passing the ammunition boxes she had arranged when inspiration struck. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a box of cartridges and hurled it directly at Montgomery's. "You face." He fired reflexively, the bullet going wide as he flinched. The sudden movement threw him off balance, just long enough for Eleanor to lunge forward, driving her shoulder into his midsection with all her strength. Montgomery stumbled backward, colliding with the cell door. His pistol discharged again as they grappled, the bullet ricocheting off the stone wall. Eleanor fought with desperate intensity, knowing her life depended on these critical seconds. She managed to slam Montgomery's gun hand against the doorframe, the impact causing him to drop the weapon. It clattered to the floor between them. Both lunged for it simultaneously. Montgomery's fingers closed around the pistol first. With a triumphant snarl, he brought it up, just as Eleanor struck a match she had palmed during the struggle and dropped it onto the powder trail she had created. The first cartridges exploded with a deafening crack, then another and another in rapid succession. Montgomery yelled in shock and pain as burning powder and fragments struck him. The confined space amplified the explosions, creating a cacophony that sounded like dozens of weapons firing simultaneously. Eleanor took advantage of his momentary disorientation to break free, dashing back toward the main office. Behind her, she heard Montgomery cursing as he recovered, the sound of his pursuit spurring her to greater speed. She burst into the office, shouting a warning, "Montgomery, he's inside the building!" Benjamin spun toward her voice, rifle raised. Over her shoulder, he saw Montgomery emerge from the hallway, pistol aimed at Eleanor's back. Benjamin fired in the same instant that another shot cracked from the doorway. Montgomery staggered, a look of disbelief crossing his face as he collapsed to his knees. Behind him stood Joseph Running Bear, rifle still raised. "You came," Benjamin said, relief evident in his voice. Joseph nodded once. "I brought others. They are dealing with Montgomery's men outside." True to his word, the sound of gunfire outside had changed character, more scattered now, with shouts of confusion from Montgomery's hired guns as they found themselves under attack from an unexpected quarter. On the floor, Montgomery gasped for breath, blood spreading across his chest. Judge Harmon knelt beside him, expression solemn. "Victor Montgomery, I charge you with the murder of Samuel Hayes and conspiracy against territorial authority. Make your peace with God, sir. Your time is short." Montgomery's eyes fixed on Eleanor with hatred. "You should have taken my offer," he managed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Could have been rich." "Some things are worth more than money," Eleanor replied steadily. "Samuel understood that. That's why he had to die, wasn't it? Because he saw value where you saw only profit?" Montgomery didn't answer. His eyes glazed over, his final breath rattling in his chest as the life left him. Outside, the sounds of fighting had diminished. Joseph went to the window, surveying the scene. "It is over," he reported. "Montgomery's men are surrendering or fleeing. My people are helping fight the fire." Sheriff Miller nodded gratefully. Just in time, it seems. Eleanor felt the adrenaline that had sustained her suddenly drain away. She swayed on her feet, exhaustion claiming her as the immediate danger passed. Benjamin was at her side instantly, strong arms supporting her. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now." Judge Harmon picked up the sealed portfolio containing Samuel's research. "Thanks to all of you, especially you, Miss Wilson. Your courage has preserved a discovery that may save countless lives." Eleanor leaned against Benjamin, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Samuel would be gratified to know his work will continue. And his brother will ensure it does," Benjamin added, his arm tightening around her waist. As dawn broke over Cascade Falls, the townspeople had managed to contain the fire to just a few buildings. The livery stable was a complete loss, but the rest of the town had been saved. Montgomery's surviving men were locked in the jail cells, waiting transport to the territorial capital for trial. Eleanor stood on the sheriff's office porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Benjamin joined her, his face showing the fatigue of the night's battles, but his eyes clear and focused. "Joseph tells me the federal marshals will arrive by nightfall," he said. "Judge Harmon has already drafted papers to protect Samuel's discovery under territorial law. No one else will be able to exploit it without proper oversight." Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of completion. Samuel would be pleased. His vision for sustainable forestry can become reality now. Benjamin was quiet. For a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Eleanor, I know you came here to marry my brother. I know the life you envisioned was with him." She turned to face him fully. "Life seldom follows the paths we envision." "No," he agreed softly. "Sometimes it leads us to unexpected places and people we never anticipated meeting." He took her hands in his. "I'm not Samuel, I never will be, but these past days with you have shown me a future I never thought possible." Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes, not of grief, but of recognition, of the unexpected bond that had formed between them through danger and shared purpose. "Benjamin Hayes," she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "I came west to marry a man I knew through his letters. Instead, I found a man I've come to know through his actions, his courage, his unwavering integrity." His eyes searched hers, hope warring with restraint. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" "I'm saying that when you're ready, when we're both ready, I would be honored to consider a future together, not as Samuel's replacement, but as your partner in whatever life we build." The smile that transformed Benjamin's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, brilliant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their unspoken commitment. When they finally parted, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "We'll honor Samuel's memory by carrying his work forward," he promised. "Together." Eleanor nodded, her heart full. She had traveled across a continent seeking a husband, only to find him taken from her before they could meet. Yet, in that loss, she had discovered her own strength, a cause worth fighting for, and a love that had grown not from letters and imagination, but from shared danger and mutual respect. As they stood together watching the new day dawn over Cascade Falls, Eleanor knew that while her journey had not led where she expected, it had brought her exactly where she needed to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.